Well, good evening, and welcome to Visionary Conversations. I'm David Barnard, President and Vice Chancellor of the University of Manitoba, and I'll be your moderator this evening. The University of Manitoba campuses are located on original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. Our topic tonight is Universities Today, Where Do Centuries-Old Institutions Fit in Modern Society? Since their formation in the Middle Ages, at least recognizably in their current form, some academies much older than that, universities generally have had three main functions or purposes: education, research and scholarship, and community engagement. A great deal has changed over the centuries, but these three aspects of our work have remained the same. And tonight, we can examine each of these pillars and consider the challenges and opportunities they present. Are universities adapting well to changes in our society and the way in which information is acquired and conveyed? And given that universities are hubs of research, are we responsive enough to both innovations in technology and critical and current issues that demand timely answers? And given our resources and our intellectual capital, are universities fulfilling our commitment to engage with the community? So thank you for coming, and I encourage you to share in the dialogue. Many of you I recognize from other events, so you know the pattern, but just let me remind you. Each panelist will have about 5 minutes to present. I remind them to be mindful of this and to please stay within the allotted time. After the panelists have spoken, we'll open the floor for comments and questions. That's when the conversation begins. Wireless microphones will be available. Colleagues will circulate with them, so if you wish to participate, just raise your hand and we'll get someone to come to you. I want to include as many audience members in the conversation as possible, so I'd ask that you be brief in your questions and your comments. If you would like to, you can follow our conversation on Twitter, where the hashtag is #UMVisionary. This year we've also introduced a new way to engage, and I'll explain a little bit how that works in a few moments. As always, we'll conclude the discussion just before 8:30. Our first speaker is Dr. Jeffrey Taylor, Dean of Arts and Professor of History here at the University of Manitoba. Dr. Taylor's been Dean of the Faculty of Arts since 2011, after more than 20 years at Athabasca University in Alberta. He's also acting provost at University College and an alumnus of the University of Manitoba, having completed all of his degrees here. During his time at Athabasca, he served as coordinator of the Labor Studies program, chair of the Center for Work and Community Studies, and Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. A historian specializing in Canadian labor history, he's the author of 2 books and numerous articles in Canadian labor history and Canadian history more generally. He also has published a number of articles on the use of online technologies in workplace education and training. His current research interests include the origins and development of workplace grievance and arbitration systems in Canada and the application and use of internet-based learning technologies in higher education. Please welcome Dr. Jeffrey Taylor.
Well, thank you, David. My introductory comments are on the teaching and learning mission of universities. Well, you'll all be familiar with the claim that universities are not producing graduates that are relevant to the needs of society. Well, these claims are not new. From the day universities were first founded in Canada, they have constantly had to reinvent themselves and to justify their teaching and their role. Some argue that the fundamental tension in Canadian universities is between studying for personal development and acquiring the professional and technical skills that individuals need to succeed in a career. Yet when professions like law, engineering, and medicine were reinventing themselves as noble and viable careers at the start of the last century, they worked very hard to make sure their training took place in universities and not in technical colleges or on the job. Their reasoning for this was to make sure that their graduates were turned out with what they called at the time a university frame of mind. Well, this university frame of mind of the previous century is what business leaders now call soft skills: leadership, the ability to communicate, and flexibility and creativity of thought. and what they want university graduates to have. The real challenge today is not actually about the ongoing value of a university degree, but how the education that leads to that degree should be delivered and structured. University education in the 21st century needs to be relevant, the outcomes need to be clear, and it has to be delivered in a flexible manner. Students want programs that are relevant to current issues and opportunities, regardless of how universities organize knowledge within their walls. University courses and programs have been traditionally organized around disciplines such as English, chemistry, plant science, and so forth. Innovative universities of the 21st century will be those that break down disciplinary barriers across the social sciences, the natural sciences, the physical sciences, the health sciences, and the humanities to create courses and programs that draw on the knowledge contained in a variety of disciplines or that dissolve the disciplines entirely. Students also want a clear understanding of what they are actually learning in their programs of study, whether those programs are organized along traditional disciplines or not. As strange as it may seem to an outsider, students don't necessarily receive that now, depending on what programs they're taking. In the humanities and social sciences, for example, students assemble the requisite number of credits for their undergraduate degrees from a range of required and elective courses. The knowledge, skills, and abilities that students acquire in that program are not normally explicitly stated. Rather, once a student majoring in economics, for example, has completed 90 or 120 credits in required and elective courses in economics and other areas, a degree is awarded. Universities that succeed in the 21st century will be those that clearly state what basket of knowledge, skills, and abilities students will have when they complete those degrees. And students want more flexible learning opportunities. This means offering courses and programs in a variety of formats, from traditional face-to-face classroom instruction through to completely online offerings. It also means having a range of opportunities for students to transfer credits among institutions. And it means recognizing, with university credit, the prior informal learning that a student may have that is relevant to his or her particular program of study. This is learning that may have been acquired outside of colleges and universities in a variety of institutional and non-institutional settings. The best universities in the 21st century will be those that offer these flexible learning opportunities and multiple pathways to make it easy for students to study anytime, anywhere, and for their learning to be recognized wherever it's been acquired. Now, none of this means abandoning the traditional strengths of universities and the liberal arts, the basic sciences, and professional education. Nor does it mean abandoning the critical analysis that is a central part of a university education. It does mean continually rethinking and questioning what we are doing, which, after all, is what being in a university is all about. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Our second speaker is Mr. Doug McCartney. Mr. McCartney is Senior Executive Director of Science, Innovation, and Business Development within the Department of Jobs and the Economy for the province of Manitoba. He has a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Winnipeg and a Master of Business Administration degree from the University of Manitoba. He's also a graduate of the University of Saskatchewan Certificate Program in Healthcare Administration and the Biological Sciences Certificate Program at Red River College. In his current role, he provides leadership and strategic direction to the department, the province's business community, and its research sector on economic development matters regarding innovation, research, and new technology development. In the past year, he authored the Manitoba Innovation Strategy, a long-term plan to create a greater focus on innovation and entrepreneurship in the province. He also has been involved in the introduction of programs to grow the province's research capacity assist startup companies in their launch, product development, and entry into new markets. Please welcome Mr. Doug McCartney.
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here and to speak from the perspective of research, but also the perspective of the business community and industry at large. The economy of Manitoba is transitioning. It's moving from a traditional manufacturing base to one that's clearly centered around knowledge, innovation, and value-added production. And this new economic reality is forcing the university to change the way in which they perceive themselves and the way in which they interact with their community. I thought this would be a very good way to start because it clearly is the dawning of a new age. The model is changing, and universities are having to demonstrate value to stakeholders as a result of the fact of technology advancing, as a result of the fact of a need to be more responsive to its stakeholders, as a result of the fact that there are fewer resources from which to operate. And there are higher expectations from students, from faculty, from government, from industry in terms of the role that the universities play in our society. And it's becoming increasingly clear that the degree to which the universities engage and how they engage and the frequency with which they engage with their community is really going to be indicative of how well they are going to be successful moving forward. As a result of this increased demand on value, it's become clear that the universities have to engage their stakeholder groups in a collaborative manner. And as a result, many universities now are moving towards a model in which collaboration is central to how they operate, far from being competitive with other institutions and deliverers of education, to one in which they work closely with industry and government and understand what those needs are. And a case in point is what this university has done really around the idea of transformational partnerships. And I indicate a company by the name of Exodus Technologies because it truly represents what I think is the future of academic science in the 21st century. This is a company started by 2 MBA students at this university. They in turn partnered with a professor within the Faculty of Human Ecology around the development of a technology that's focused on dealing with bacteria on surfaces. They've been able through this company to raise $1.25 million in the last year, and this company has the potential to reach $100 million within the next 5 years. So this is an example of how the universities are transitioning themselves to really being deliverers of value that ultimately is going to create both social, economic, and cultural benefits far beyond what they traditionally were doing. So clearly the model and the approaches that universities are taking as they relate to wealth, as they relate to wellness, and as they relate to well-being are changing. And it's becoming clear that universities now have to start thinking themselves more as a business that's where vision and leadership within the community is important, a business where engaging proactively with their stakeholders, that being their customers, is essential, and one in which the degree to which they communicate their value in terms of their strategic areas of focus, their priorities, and the way in which they are meeting the needs of the community has to be more clearly articulated. And I believe this university is leading the way in that under Dr. Bernard's tutorage, and I think there's a number of examples that we could get into in the question and answer period that demonstrate how the university is really following this novel approach to service delivery. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Doug. Our final speaker this evening is Dr. Sharon McDonald, who is a faculty member in Community Health Sciences at the College of Medicine within the Faculty of Health Sciences. An alumna of the university, she is the current director of the Allen Class Memorial Health Equity Program and recently the past head of the Department of Community Health Sciences and former medical director of the Masters of Physician Assistant Studies program. Over the course of her career, she's worked in the fields of Indigenous health, public health, and community health service delivery systems. She's served in many capacities in Manitoba's healthcare system, including Chief Medical Officer of Health, Assistant Deputy Minister, Community Services, Manitoba Health, and Vice President and Chief Operating Officer, Community Health Services at the Winnipeg Regional Health Authority. She is the 2014 recipient of the Dr. and Mrs. Ralph Campbell Outreach Award, an honor bestowed upon a University of Manitoba staff member who unquestionably demonstrates meritorious service and outreach activities. Her outreach activities have had a positive impact on Manitobans, beginning with providing medical services to Indigenous communities in the province and in Nunavut. Her current research interests include health equity, public health, knowledge translation, and Indigenous health. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Sharon McDonald.
Thank you. Thank you and good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming out tonight. Well, I prepared my notes last night, as any good speaker should, and sure enough, you get up in the morning, and who do you see in the editorial page of the newspaper but your boss? So Dr. Bernard was on in the editorial column on the op-ed side, and there are a couple of things that came up when I read his comments that I thought I might highlight tonight and see if we can push him and our discussion a little farther. So the things that struck me about my topic, which is about the community.
Thank you very much.
And my focus tonight is on the community. Is a statement which says the value of a university degree remains strong. Secondly, the fastest growing segment of the population in Manitoba is that of Indigenous people. And thirdly, as community partners, universities have a responsibility to support our citizens and economy, and then goes on to cite some of the activities that are ongoing in the community. There's no question that people in the University of Manitoba in many different ways are involved in our community here in Manitoba. Some of it's in high-tech science and finding cures for disease. Some of it is overseas, and we have some wonderful models of community engagement there. But I think we need to focus on Manitoba. And I'm going to propose that our focus and our approach needs to, in the first instance, focus on Winnipeggers, Manitobas, and the kind of people that Dr. Bernard has noted in his paper. So let's think about the community for a moment. So what do you think of? What comes to your mind when you think of community? Do we have a deep understanding of the context of life in Manitoba? How our community are living? We can read the newspaper, and there always, it seems, is a picture and a compelling picture, a compelling message, or a compelling story. But we don't do that so much anymore. We don't have these pictures facing us in the restaurants and on the newsstands, or as we line up at Timmy's for a donut. So in the article, Dr. Bernard has spoken indirectly about the social contract between the University of Manitoba as a publicly funded organization and its contribution to the public good and to affect change over time. Well, I think we need to, as a university, take things farther, and we need to formulate and develop our ideas of what the core values are around community, engaged scholarship. This is a science. There's a literature about it. People have written about it. Scholars, professional organizations, learned commissions. And they've defined engaged scholarship. Scholarship is what is being done. Engaged scholarship is how it is done. And for the common good is toward the end of why it is done. Engaged scholarship is focused on answering questions, resolving issues, and working with the community. It has two components, engagement and scholarship. We have the opportunity to bring the university's resources together in that concept, in that frame, and to do compelling and important work. Scholars and students will learn from the community, There needs to be reciprocity and collaboration. It needs to be a bilateral interaction. Engaged scholarship as a framework and as a concept can be applied to teaching, research, and service. It can be used throughout the world because in the end, we progress on the basis mostly of our relationships. So what do we need to do in order to encourage our students and our faculty in the university to engage in respectful relationships which answer questions and issues important to the community? There are several things we need to think about. One, the principles of engagement need to be a core value of the university. The academic work being done has to be credible scholarship. The faculties need to be recognized for community-engaged scholarships, just as they would for any other traditional scholarship. Resources need to be made available to the community. If you take students or research out into the community, there are costs to individuals and to organizations. The university will always be, in our community relationships, the organization with the most money, so we do need to share. And we also know that this is hard work. It takes time. We need space to meet with community leaders, to meet with community members. We need to work across disciplines, and tensions will arise, and we need mechanisms by which to resolve these tensions. The university needs to respond to the current important questions and concerns of the community. Otherwise, our century-old institutions will simply not be relevant. Communities change, and universities need to be right there with them. So let's engage, and let's be scholarly. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And thanks to all of the panelists for opening remarks. So now we'll begin the conversational part of the program where you can ask questions of the panelists or offer an opinion. Before our first question, I'd like to mention the engagement tool we're using this year, which is Conferences.io. You can submit questions for the panelists and rank questions that fellow audience members have posted, and we'll draw some questions from that source throughout the evening. Our aim is to make sure that we're addressing the questions that are top of mind for the audience. Instructions were placed on the tables prior to the event, and we have something up on the screen as well. Follow the web address and you'll be prompted to enter the online discussion. We welcome your feedback and participation throughout tonight's discussion. So, I would invite comments, questions, advice. Here we go.
Thank you very much to all three speakers. I guess I'll just start off by asking Jeff. You commented on the University of the 21st Century, and that we need to really break down disciplinary barriers. We really need to think about how we teach, what we teach in a very different manner. Do you have any thoughts on how we get there? Because my view, working within the university, is that we're really still the university of the 19th century, despite some of the, I think, very unique things that we are doing. And Sharon did, talked about it. So, so did Doug. I think we're starting to do some things, but for the most part, 19th century might be even optimistic.
Yeah, I know it is a challenge. Universities are very conservative places. There's an irony, I think, about universities in the sense that they're often filled with people who have very radical ideas, but when it comes to actually changing universities, they can be very tradition-bound. I think that there is, universities are simply going to have to respond and adapt given the competition that exists. Now, University of Manitoba might be in a slightly different situation in that, and it may be similar to other provincial universities, in that there is a particular local brand which is strong, and there is a certain amount of guaranteed number of students who will come here. But if you look to the east of Ontario, where there's quite a larger number of universities in that system. There are universities that are struggling. The smaller universities, the regional universities, are seeing declining enrollments. Even a place like York University, a very large university, but it's seeing declining enrollments, particularly in the humanities and social sciences. And there is a whole body of literature, which I don't necessarily subscribe to, but that argues that universities are involved in a great disruption at the moment, and that's around the impact of technology. I mean, there is some merit to that argument, but I think it's a bit technologically determinist. But I think universities are going to have to adapt just because of the requirements that students have and what students are bringing. For example, I talked about the recognition of prior learning, right? And or the recognition of other learning, if you like. I mean, this is one area where this whole question of technological disruption, I think, has some importance for a university like Manitoba, in that students can now go out and be taking courses. They may be non-credit courses, they may be credit courses in other universities and other institutions, and they may want to bring those back for credit here, and we have to be prepared to respond to that. So I think there's certainly some challenges in terms of universities changing. They can be very tradition bound, but I think the broader environment is going to be forcing us to do that.
Ask a hypothetical question. If the university was totally free, it was totally abundant and swimming in money and didn't have to worry about where the funds come from, would our discussion on what the university should look like, would it be different? Or if I turn this question around, are universities driven to a large extent or to a frightening extent to satisfy where our money is coming from?
Comments? Sharon, do you want to comment on that?
I can take it.
Sure, I'll comment on that and relate it to my experience in medicine, in the medical field. So 4 decades ago, when I was in medical school, we had some pioneers in trying to convince us to go easy on the lab tests and the x-rays because it didn't really add to our diagnostic capacity. And guess what we're still talking about now, 40 years later? Okay, so now we're talking about MRIs. Let's not do so many because they don't add to our diagnostic capacity. And all of that in the context of there's just not enough money. Well, there's never ever going to be enough money. But if you don't do things within these periods of time, you'll never do anything. So I think that we can use lack of money, not quite enough money, as a reason to stand still and not do anything. And so I would say you have to move ahead. You have to push ahead, and whether or not there appear to be enough funds or not, it can't impede progress and change.
Doug?
So I would say that it's not so much the lack of money, it's the expectations that come with the money that is given. When I make the case to go forward and have government fund a program, inevitably the things that they focus on are what is the return on our investment going to look like, and when is that return going to take place? It's not so much about the activity itself, it's the value for money proposition. And that in my mind is what's changed the dynamic with respect to what universities do and how they interact with their stakeholder groups.
Jeff, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, if there's enough money to do the things that we want, and enough money for whoever wants to go to university, then I think that would be a good thing around access, to ensure that everyone who has the ability to go to university is able to get to university. And so it's not simply the universities having the money, but having the supports there in the communities to ensure that those students who have the aptitude and want to go to university are able to gain access. I mean, then I don't think that the mission of universities change. I mean, I think we still have important missions to, and I focused on some areas where I think that there needs to be some changes in universities. But I close by saying there's still that historic mission of universities, if you like. I mean, we still have a responsibility to keeping the traditions of knowledge alive. And certainly in my area, I'm Dean of Arts. I mean, it's really important that we have that range of humanities programming available, from classics through philosophy, through history, and we have to ensure that those are there, and but also that we are performing the role of training for the job market, regardless of whether the professions or otherwise. So I think if there's enough money, we can certainly ensure that we do the things that we need to do. But there also needs to be some way to ensure that we are responding in the way we need to respond to social needs.
If I could, I think I've been really good in these previous sessions not to actually participate in the conversation, just to guide questions, but I have some interest in this topic. I think one of the things that is a challenge for us in the contemporary university is that in the period since the Second World War, so in the last half century and a little bit more, we've seen a tremendous increase in the participation rate in universities. Universities used to be accessible only really to an elite, however that elite was defined, whether it was accessible because of money or intelligence or whatever, people who could get in or people who could pay to get in. We have come to expect that a much larger proportion of society will participate in post-secondary education and university education in particular. And with that has come increased government funding, increased scrutiny by government, increased expectations by the public, so that while I think it's always been the case that aspirations of universities exceed the resources available to meet them, we live now in a world where expectations are high, and they're shared widely, and so government is much more involved, and the general public is much more involved in the conversation about universities than it has been in the past. Does that ring true for you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Here.
I've been hearing that universities are being told to knock off basic research and get with applied research, or because that generates economic return. A comment and then a question. There's two problems with that. The application research is based on basic research foundation. And the second thing is if you become involved with applied research, you get involved with patent granting and holding cards close to your chest because of pending patents and that sort of thing. So my question is, how does a university walk the tightrope between those two things: the basic research, the pure learning, pure pure information, and the other that's would drive economic return?
You were directing that to Dean Taylor, I think, right?
Whoever wants to answer.
So I agree, it's a very fine line in which to walk. I also support your statement that basic research is essential to the backbone of a university. Not all investments in research should be applied in directions that ultimately lead to some type of applied technology or some kind of applied benefit. But the reality is that those organizations that are funding research, by and large, are wanting to see some level of return again from their investment, and that return, by and large, has an economic lens to it. So I think it's a case of being actively engaged with universities in the discussion around what are their research priorities, and how do we align government thinking, from my perspective, with what those priorities are. And that level of dialogue with this university is quite active. And so that I think it's critical in terms of addressing that issue, that the discussions take place as early as possible rather than after the fact that the work has in essence been mapped out and you come back to your funders and say, now fund this. It's really a case of being much more proactive in the discussion.
Either of the other want to comment on that? Sharon?
Well, this is certainly a point of important discussion, particularly amongst basic scientists, as to will we, through focusing on the application in such a strong way, miss the opportunities to make new discovery? And I think there's also a fine line there. And I think we need to continue that discussion. I'm not sure that, and I have to say I don't know, that there is a definitive proof that important advances in science have been made by multidisciplinary teams versus individuals working with a smaller team in a single laboratory. So I think those who have an experience in basic sciences and new discovery have to keep that agenda on the table, and I think it behooves government, industry, and other and universities to try and measure whether this change in discourse about science and applied science versus science for science, what the losses are and what the gains are. And I think we have to keep that in mind, and we have to try and understand that better.
There's lots of capacity in universities to do basic research. I mean, every faculty member has 3 components to their job, and the rough formula is used is 40-40-20. 40% of your time teaching, 40% of your time doing research, and 20% doing service. So every faculty member has 40% of their time to do research, and they can do whatever they can research whatever they want within their area of expertise. So there's lots of basic research going on right there. Where it becomes an issue is around the funding. And certainly the funding, there is a tendency, certainly on the federal granting agencies, to put more emphasis, particularly in this government, more emphasis on commercialization and and collaboration with industry and other partners. So it's when researchers apply for money that they may encounter those kind of constraints. But having said that, there's still lots of money from funding agencies for basic research. So I don't think there's any chance of that disappearing, although there are those pressures there. But having said that, it's only the pressure for collaboration is, I mean, we tend to think about it in terms of with industry and around commercialization. But one of the positive features of the collaboration across certainly the social sciences and humanities, where most of my work is that as a result of that, we have faculty members who in the past may not have done it, but now are working with community organizations of a variety of different types. Indigenous organizations, for example, poverty organizations, and those are all positive engagements with the community, and would be called applied research.
If I could, I'd just add a comment on one of the points you made towards the end of your remarks, that focus on more applied research can sometimes cause the dissemination of information to be impeded because people are concerned about protecting intellectual property and so on. I wish that our colleague Dig Vergias, who's the Vice President Research and International, had been able to be here tonight, because he has taken this university in a creative direction where we've said that rather than trying to negotiate, we make it available as an option to faculty members who develop intellectual property to say, rather than trying to protect it up front, negotiate, you've got a company, I've got an idea, we'll decide how we're going to do business, that what we'll do is we'll give the option to say, you have a license to use the technology, the information. And once you have started to make money, we'll figure out, we'll split it. As Digver said, we used to spend a lot of time arguing about how to divide the $0 that had been earned so far. And what we're trying to do now is get things moving and have an impact. And I must say the response from the community to that has been very positive. Merci.
Nice talks, and I really appreciate and understand the perspectives of each panelist. But I have a problem here, which is when I stop and turn back, I don't see any followers following me, doing the progress along with me. So my question is how we would prepare the high school students or prospective university students to be ready to to the engagements and progress that we are trying to make at this university.
Anyone want to venture an opinion?
So I can speak to a couple of examples that this university is looking at now. So they're in the process of putting together a program around student entrepreneurship, in which university students at this university are given the opportunity on their own to come up with an idea for some type of technology that they feel could be transformative, and that through this program they will be put in touch with faculty members that share that interest, or with industry that shares that interest, for the purpose of looking at how can you take this idea and move it forward. That unto itself is building relationships with stakeholder groups that students would normally not interact with. And I think ultimately it helps to expose them to what entrepreneurship is all about. And there is a growing community in this city around entrepreneurship. Many young people right now are not looking at necessarily traditional jobs. They are wanting to start their own businesses. And there are now a number of opportunities and programs out in the community that these individuals are gravitating to take the knowledge that they learned in post-secondary education and move it out into the workforce and to be their own boss. And we need to plan for that reality, because it is only going to grow in its prominence. And we need people like yourself that are leading to make students aware that these kinds of opportunities are out there.
Yeah, but I think I missed my point. How we prepare the high school students to get there is my question, or was my question. You talked about great opportunities for the entrepreneurship, etc., but at the university level or post after the graduation. But my question is how we will prepare the high school students or pre-university students to get involved and engage in these new technologies or new advances which is happening at the universities.
So one of the things that recently took place, and it's been ongoing for some time, is a Rotary Career Symposium. Both universities and the colleges are active participants in that show in terms of profiling their programs. The province now is actively involved as well in working with industry to make sure that those jobs of tomorrow and the industries that are going to be employing people with those skill sets are very visible. And the intent is that as high school students, when they enter that venue or that career fair and see technologies being used in various ways, can talk to the people, the business people that are in the process of developing those technologies, and through conversations with them, understand what skills are required. So they know then what they need, what skills they require, and they can have a much more informed discussion with the universities or post-secondary institutions in terms of what programs they need to take. So it's a case of trying to position them so that they're aware of what those jobs of the future are going to look like, and then to engage the post-secondaries in terms of, so what skills do I need? What are the skills I need, and what programs can you offer me that'll give me those skills?
Thank you. Let's take a question from the
Conferences IO. Question is, are universities graduating more students than there are jobs available?
Anyone want to answer?
Well, they may be graduating more than there are jobs available, although the unemployment rate in Manitoba is relatively low. But I would argue that, I guess the way I would respond to that question is that I think we do a very good job of preparing students for the job market, including in the faculty, my faculty, the Faculty of Arts. But also there's more to a university education than simply being prepared for the job market. We educate students for citizenship. We educate them in the grand traditions of our culture, and it's a wonderful experience to be able to spend 4 years in university education, simply being able to think and read and have conversations with your colleagues and with your professors.
I might make a comment that I can speak a little bit about medicine, and I think it's getting to be a bit of a fine balance, that we've never been very good at predicting medical manpower. We continue, even though we have more doctors than we've ever had, to have maldistribution. So we have some very sticky problems in this province and in this country, which aren't going away despite the fact we produced more physicians. So it's in the case of the healthcare opportunities for people, whether it's any of the health sciences, the occupational therapy, respiratory therapy, nursing, physicians, dentistry. Yes, we might at some point be producing too many. Our major problem is that we're not very good at predicting what the job market requires, and because we're dealing with programs that are 4, 6, 8 years long, we have trouble looking into the future. So that adds another element of uncertainty.
I think another way to think about that question is that a large number of the jobs that are being created in Canada are jobs that require university education. In fact, during the period from 2008 for the next 5 or 6 years, I can't remember, I don't have the figures with me, but my recollection is either 800 or 900,000 net new jobs were created requiring university level credentials during that period of time that included a pretty massive reduction in the scale of the economy. So there is a very lively market for people who have university education. And again, I can't remember the data off the top of my head, but Statistics Canada data show that most students that are graduating from universities are finding jobs. They are finding them in the disciplines for which they studied, and they're doing so within a reasonably short period of time after they graduate. So statistically, there are certainly going to be variations from that, but on average, there are jobs, people are getting them, they're well paid.
I'd just like to add a comment, which is a bit of a twist on the question, which is, are those that want to acquire a certain job and are aware of the skills able to access the programs within universities in order to acquire those skills? So is the universities accommodating those who want to come to universities for the purpose of entering the job market?
Question here.
I wanted to bring another element in terms of pressures for change for the university, and that is trade agreements. Over the last 30 years, there has been an increase in the global market for commercial education services, and governments are participating in these agreements. So they are giving opportunities to suppliers of commercial education services to go in more markets and supply. And I don't know how this is taken into account in terms of the future evolution of the university, but certainly it will bring more pressures, including, of course, the pressures for mutual recognition of qualifications.
Jeff, do you want to comment?
So you mean private providers? More private providers?
Yes, both domestic and international.
Right. Yeah, well, I mean, I think I mean, I was referring earlier, to answer the first question about the kind of great disruption, if you like, and I think that's part of it, is that there are a lot more opportunities for students to acquire university level learning. And that's certainly a challenge for traditional universities. I mean, one thing traditional universities have, of course, is a particular brand and a prestige that's attached to that. So I think that's, I mean, that has some value and benefit in that market. But certainly there are, in particular areas, there are, like in business and technology and so forth, where commercial providers or private providers are more likely to enter the market. Then there are some challenges there, and universities have to be prepared, on the one hand, to protect their market to the extent they can, but also to recognize that learning, if it's university level learning, to recognize that and allow students to transfer in credit if they want to do that to our university or any other similar university.
This question is mostly for Dr. Taylor here. I was wondering about the humanities courses. So, like, as you get to more like technical subjects, you tend to have like more required courses and there's less electives. So, like, for example, like engineering has like most of the credit hours for engineering are very technical subjects, and there's only a handful of electives which goes to humanities. And then once they graduate, they have pretty good job prospects. And then you have like the art students who actually take out a whole degree on these humanities subjects. And then once they graduate, they have trouble holding off getting a job relevant to their field. So my question here is, how does the humanities and technical course mix? How do you determine that? Like, how is it like for engineering? How do you get that balance so that students have the humanities, yet also students also have the technical skills, so that once they graduate, they have a job?
Well, certainly in a profession like engineering, the accrediting body normally specifies that they want graduates from engineering to have a certain number of credits, very few credits, because there's not very much room in their programs, but credits in the humanities or kind of critical thinking, however it may be described. So those students would take those courses as part of their program. For students who are majoring in the humanities, the programs are going to be a mix of required and elective courses, and there's going to be normally more elective courses than you would find, say, in engineering. But students are expected to put together a program that, say, if they're majoring in English, that they have a certain number of credits in English and then some credits in other areas. Now, those students are maybe hoping to get a job in that area, but not necessarily so. They may be wanting to be taking that because they're interested in the subject area, but also to get a kind of broad set of skills. Those soft skills that I was talking about earlier, the university frame of mind, a broad set of skills that will allow them entry to a variety of occupations. And they may go on and do graduate work. They may go on and do another credential of some kind. But they have acquired some important skills that are useful in the job market. But they've also acquired a broader, breadth of knowledge that prepares them to be good citizens in the world.
I'm not certain whether I've got all my facts straight, but I apologize if some of them are wrong. A few years ago, I noticed on campus that there was a meeting place that was put up for Indigenous students. And I'm curious as to how many students from the First Nations peoples there are now at the university, what sort of courses they're taking, how successful they are they, and how are they accepted by the general populace here. I thought it was a great idea, and I'd just like an update.
Sure. Sharon, do you want to speak from the perspective of medicine?
Yes, there are probably some people in the audience that have some of those figures at their fingertips. Susan, would you have be able to respond to some of that, and maybe we could follow up from there? I'll let you introduce yourself.
We have. I'm right behind you. We have actually about 7.9% of our total population is Indigenous. That's about 2,200, 2,300 students in every faculty, every program. Migiziagamik is the Bald Eagle Lodge that you're referring to. We typically have about 800 of those students coming and using those facilities. There are academic supports, social, cultural supports on the Bannatyne campus, and Sharon would be able to talk to that. There's also a center that supports our students that are on the Bannatyne campus. We have an increasing number of graduate students who are Indigenous. We actually have set ourselves some very I'd call them a bit stretch goals for us to increase the number of Indigenous students, and so that really is, as Dr. Barnard would attest, it's one of our key priorities. How well are those students doing? I think that they could be doing better. I mean, some of them don't find the campus as welcoming. They have all sorts of barriers. They're single parents. They are coming from remote communities. They need role models, but increasingly they're graduating and going on to our professional and graduate programs. So I can't remember the last part of your question, but we have many, many more than we had in the past, and we're hoping that within a few years we'll see an increase again. Yeah.
And we have some specific programs, such as in medicine. We have the Engineering Access Program, program in business. We're quite confident this university has graduated more Indigenous engineers than any other university in the country. What the number that Susan mentioned is the number really of self-identified students, and a lot of our colleagues who work with that community of students think that in fact it could be quite a bit larger, perhaps as much as 35% larger, something like that. Maybe it's more like 3,000 students if everyone was comfortable to identify themselves. But it's still, as you can tell, out of a population of roughly 30,000, even if we were roughly 3,000, to make the math easy, that's 10%. And that's not representative yet of the population, so we want to see it increase.
What are the consequences of seeing the university as a business?
I thought it was a business. There is a business component to this university, isn't there?
Go ahead. Well, I think this is a reference back to the question. I assume it's reference to the comment that Doug made.
So I think the risk of them not, the question is the risk of being a business. I think some would argue it takes away that openness to creative thought and dialogue, that the activities of the university are very much focused on outcomes set by others rather than outcomes set by themselves. So it's again trying to balance that paradigm where you're allowing for that creative thought and that dialogue and that openness and that engagement. On the other hand, you're having to meet some very high expectations as it relates to the people that are providing you with the resources in which to have that creative activity. So that's the potential threat in terms of to what extent does it impact that ability for what you were originally established to do.
Maybe I could make another observation. I have a very good friend who is ethnically East Indian. He's a surgeon, He's practiced for large parts of his life in Canada, and he also returns to regions near his home community in India and practices there, usually for several months of the year. And at one point in a conversation about his home country, he observed to me, anything you say about India will be true. Right? And for those of us that have visited there, we're very aware of the contrast, right? You can be driving down a street and see wonderful, beautiful homes with columns decorating them and beautiful ironwork gates, and 50 meters away, little hutments of people living in squalor. You can be driving down a street, passing people cooking food on the side of the road, and turn into an amazing campus of a high-tech company. Well, that sentiment, to me, is in large measure true of the university. Almost anything you can say about a university as a priority is going to be part of what the university wants to do. The university needs to be managed carefully, but it doesn't want to have only financial returns as its objectives. Right? It needs to do, as Dean Taylor pointed out earlier, people need to be involved in scholarship, and both basic and Doug and Jeff both talked about this, both basic and applied research. But it's not one or the other. It's these things need to be held in some kind of balance, some kind of tension. And so I think part of the struggle for us in the university is trying to decide what's the right balance point on some of these things, because they're competing goods. Right? It's not that this one is good and this one is evil. It's that they both are important. And there are people outside the university who value all of them, and there are people inside the university who value all of them. So the challenge is an ongoing balancing kind of problem. Right? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Denisa.
I wonder if the speakers could talk a little more about the international context in which the university currently operates. I think it was implicit in the talk about competition that we face, especially with new technologies, but also with travel so easy now. Students no longer necessarily need to come to their home university in the province where they were born, but also in terms of markets, entrepreneurship, people who move back and forth between Manitoba and the rest of the world. Our community is local, and it's still important that we're connected to that local community, but increasingly our community is also global. So we've heard a bit about initiatives with Indigenous peoples. I wonder if you could talk a bit about the internationalization side of things. As both, obviously it's one of the pressures, one of the constraints, but one of the opportunities as well.
Mm-hmm. Who wants to start?
Sure. So I think one of the real strategic things that this university did was to designate their vice president of research as the vice president of research and international. What that signaled was that the work that goes on in this university has impacts that go beyond just this community, and that the value that's being created in this university can provide value far outside this community. What it also has done, because I have had the opportunity to travel internationally with the Vice President of Research and International, is it really opens up the dialogue in terms of the willingness of this university to engage with people, with industry, with stakeholder groups, regardless of the jurisdiction in which they reside. So I think it was a very strategic and important move, and I think it signaled to people primarily outside of this province that this university really has a much broader focus than just this community, and sees itself as a contributor to that global good, not just in terms of the value within this community.
Sharon, you were talking about the importance of the local community, but also in your faculty there are some great examples of international work.
Yes, there certainly are, and have been for decades now. And the work around HIV/AIDS and the Kenya connection is an important one. Started in the 70s, so we have 40, 50 years now working with Kenya and Africa, and that is also been disseminated to not the HIV/AIDS, but the work on the the research to India, Nigeria, other communities in Africa. It has had many, provided many opportunities for students, but part of the philosophy of many of the people working on HIV/AIDS, they come from an infectious disease background, but they brought many individuals from Africa here to our university, and as has happened with the India connection. So there's been really a bilateral opportunities to work in their country, opportunities for them to come here, and a great deal of sharing. So it's been very rich. If you go to the community engagement website in the University of Manitoba, you'll see dots all over the world of where people are. Doug McGuire, who's an anesthetist, mostly at Health Sciences Centre in Winnipeg, is on his way to Nepal with the Red Cross. So whether it's, we have students, quite a few students now who travel and have international experiences. Some of that's through the student affairs. And medical students do international electives during the course of their studies. They also do nursing, pharmacy, and medical students do summer electives as well. So there's lots going on. And I still stand by my statement that we need to really be concerned with some of our very important issues here. There's lots going on the world stage, and we also, I think, probably haven't capitalized in some respects, in some of the areas I'm familiar with, about some of the lessons learned as people work in other countries. Do we bring those home to Canada and apply them here?
Jeff, did you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I mean, we have a significant number of international students. In fact, the university has exceeded its targets for national students in the Strategic Enrollment Management Plan, and we now have to think about, whether we change those or what we do. And we have there's a significant number of agreements in place for students to travel abroad. But actually, one of the challenges at the University of Manitoba is getting more students. I mean, I spoke earlier about we have a bit of a protected market in the sense that students, quite a number of local students are going to come to the University of Manitoba. One of the downsides of that is they don't seem to want to go beyond Manitoba sometimes, right? And so we have, even though we have quite a few agreements with other institutions, it's a challenge convincing our own students to travel internationally, and I think that's one of the challenges we have to work on in the coming years here. Is because clearly it's important for students to have the exposure to the international students who come here, but also clearly to be taking advantage of those opportunities to take a term abroad or what have you.
And I would just observe that's not unique to the University of Manitoba or to the province of Manitoba. In conversations with presidents from universities across the country, this is an issue for us as Canadians. I think that a lot of us have a very geographically parochial view of what the country is, and if we want to have cohesion, we really need to get a lot more of our young people learning more about our country.
So again, thank you very much for the presentations, and I think it goes back to Dean Taylor, your comment about how universities prepare individuals, and my background's in education, and I believe in learning outcomes and goals and aspirations, and I know David Letterman uses the top 5 or top 10, but maybe if it was each of you taking the top 3 things that you think our graduates should have in common. I sometimes think in metaphors and ideas in terms of the backpack as whatever their discipline is, but then they have these other skill sets, and I think it's, again, unique that the 3 of you presented on those topics of the traditional university and the business community and the community, and then be able to think of, so if we were graduating these leaders of the 21st century, what sort of skills, competencies, learning outcomes do you think they should have?
Sharon, you want to start?
Oh, we're going to go 1-1-1 or 5-5-5. Let's see. Well, I would hope that every graduate from the University of Manitoba has an ethical framework in which they operate, number one. Number two, I would hope that every student who graduates is able to work with other people. They may or may not have role models here around that, but that they understand what it takes to go out and work with other people. And I think that all students should have some learning in the humanities. I'll stop there for the moment.
So I would say that every student should leave this university believing that this community offers them the ability to be successful in whatever they want to do. I think a student leaving this university should be aware that the path to there should be aware that although they may not know the pathway from when they graduate to where they want to go, that there are people in this community that can help them along that journey, and that there is no wrong door. Meaning that if they start to engage in a discussion with someone around what that future looks like, that person can direct them to appropriate resources. And I think the other thing that I would hope that students leave here is an appreciation for the fact that we live in a global community, and that the things that they do here can have an impact globally.
Jeff?
Yeah, I'd certainly echo that. What I also add is that I think a student should leave the University of Manitoba with the ability to fundamentally question and query and be skeptical about the world around them. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to not accept everything, but that they have the skills to question received wisdom, question authority, and come to their own conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this picks up on a number of themes that have been talked about. Sharon, you talked about it in relation to the community and so on. Doug, you've spoken about it in relation to business. You talked, Jeff, about just the kinds of things you just mentioned around what people need to know. One of my concerns is that we tend to think about the universities and a lot of the head scratching and navel gazing that's going on right now is how do we serve the business community better, and that there's pressure from the business community. I think we have to step back from that and recognize very clearly that business is only one element of society and of the economy, and in fact there are a lot of other elements, including the university, all kinds of education institutes, all these things are all part of the economy. So it's not just business. And what concerns me is that I think we think actively about the business side of it, but we do not think actively necessarily about the other side of it and the rest of the community that we're serving with the same kind of discipline and thinking through and engagement with those sectors. And I'm just wondering if the University of Manitoba has done, if any of you are familiar with steps that have been taken to kind of more actively think about that side of things and how we handle that and ensure that the universities provide that, or this university provides that to those sectors as well as to the business sector.
Sharon, you want to start? There's some good examples, I think, in your faculty.
Throw me a couple of hints. I'm a little stuck. I'm going to see if some of my colleagues can help me out.
Well, I'd say things like this are important. I mean, to the extent that you can offer people the opportunity for engagement and communication is absolutely key. But it starts with leadership, and it starts with someone having a vision about what that university looks like within the context of that broader community. And much like I said in my opening remarks, I mean, all three have to work together. There needs to be that leadership working in parallel with an openness to engage with people across the community, and a willingness to communicate really what that vision is, and the role that the leadership within this institution sees the university within that broader community. I think that's where it starts. You set that framework, and I think a lot of the rest of it will follow.
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the Asper School of Business, an Aboriginal business program, Wanda Watney leads that. In our economics department, there's a number of people doing work around community economic development. There's a major SHIRT partnership grant process that has people from economics and from other areas. It's working around Indigenous communities on reserves and in the inner city. So there's certainly, I think, and there's a major initiative around water that involves people from a number of departments in the Faculty of Arts and is connected to our Center for Human Rights. So I think there's a number of initiatives in the university that we can point to, and there would be others as well in other faculties, where the community or the economy more broadly conceived is a subject of analysis, and that there are collaborations and connections with other groups. But I do take the point that there is a tendency to view, when we talk about the economy, to talk about business and to focus on our connections with business, which are important, but are only part of it.
Mm-hmm. I would say that in a number of our faculties, the interaction between faculty and students at the university and various sectors of the community are kind of fundamental to what this province is, and I think the same thing is true for other universities. So I'm just noticing there are a couple of deans here. The Dean of Social Work is here. I think the engagement of faculty and staff in social work education and practice, the presence of the inner city social work program in the north. So there's quite a bit of engagement there. The Dean of the Director of the School of Art is here, and the interaction between artists here and the larger community of practicing artists in this province, I think, has been important over a long period of time, and in many other ways. I think part of it's easy, but I think your point is important for us to think about, because it's easy to get captured by the rhetoric around business. But when I think about the impact of this university and its engagement mission more broadly, there's a huge spectrum of things that are underway, and more that's probably possible if we can think creatively about it.
Are we an overeducated society, and is that necessarily a good thing?
Jeff, that sounds like a question for the Dean of Arts.
No, we're not an overeducated society. I think we can ever be an overeducated society. I mean, education is a good. It's a valuable good, and the more education we can have, the better.
Sharon.
Well, I might say that sometimes I think we keep people in training programs too long and extend their education too long, when we know other countries can, and I'll refer to the health sciences and physicians, physiotherapy, occupational therapy, where in other countries medicine is essentially an entry level after high school. So yes, I think we are keeping people in training programs too long, and although I think we do not a bad job, a pretty good job of the experiential side, better than other countries, I might add. So does that mean they're overeducated? It means that we could move or change the education and the entry to practice, but really you do have to have a focus on lifelong learning, and that's an important focus in the professions, and we're required to do that to maintain our licenses. So I think the concept of continuing education, where we finish the training and begin the practice, I think boundaries there could move.
Thank you. There were some comments a couple of questions ago about students leaving the university, and I would like to ask about the students potentially going into university. My own university involvement goes back to England 60 years ago, and at that time only about 5% of the population ended up going to university. Now there are far more universities there, but that's another question. But at that time, the technical colleges and the polytechnics were very well recognized. Students would tend to either leave school at 16 and go to a technical college or go into a trade, or stay on through the sixth form and go to university. We've seen our children go through university here 30 years ago, and grandchildren are now starting. When we first came to England, to Canada rather, it was very apparent in the 60s, late 60s, that if your child didn't go to university, it was almost a failure, and that to have to go to a technical college, this was not very acceptable. Now it's very different here, and I think that's a very good thing. The only thing that concerns me is whether some of the people who are going to university, should they still be going? I am not familiar with University One. I know a couple of our grandchildren are going through this international baccalaureate program. They're working really hard, and I think they're going to be ready for university. A few years ago, there was a heavy load here for weeding people out first year. Is that still happening? I don't know.
Jeff?
No. I mean, on your general point, I mean, is there, I mean, I think it's, I mean, we have a system, I mean, it's not as developed in Manitoba as it is in some other jurisdictions around different types of institutions. But we do have universities and we have colleges. And there are some students clearly who are in university and perhaps they shouldn't be in university. And I think we have to ensure that we have mechanisms that those students are able to find, where they should be. Similarly, I suspect there are students in colleges who should be in universities. And I think we need to do more in working, universities and colleges working together to ensure that we collaborate where appropriate between university programs and college programs and have that laddering piece in place. That be done formally in terms of collaborations, but also that there be the mechanisms, the pathways for students to move from colleges to universities and from universities to colleges. And we do know the phenomenon of students who will do a university degree and then they will go on and do a college degree. Now some people think, well, you've wasted your university time. I wouldn't agree with that. I think you've developed valuable skills in university, but then you get some specialized training in a particular area that's available through a college, and you're well placed and positioned to move into the job market. So I think there's more that we certainly need to be doing around advising for students as to the appropriate way they should go, but also the universities and the colleges working together. And speaking as a university person, universities can be quite elitist around those sorts of things. And I think we have to be less elitist.
If I could just make one other observation. If you look at OECD jurisdictions and look at post-secondary attainment, Canada overall looks pretty good. But if you look at the attainment split into colleges and universities, Canada is very low relative to the rest of the OECD, not at the bottom, but it's in the lower part of the distribution with respect to universities, and it's very high with respect to colleges. So not that what other countries are doing is necessarily a measure we should hold ourselves to, but if we compare ourselves to other countries, we have more people going to college than others do, and fewer people going to universities than others do. One last question.
Oh, thanks. Thanks to the panel for a really interesting commentary. I guess I haven't heard anything on the topic that I wanted to raise, and that is with the greater number of students coming to universities that provokes this debate that's related to after degrees or after certificates in community colleges and other ways to learn, other institutions. The concern I think that I'd like to have the panel address is this question around the fact that, when it's smaller and when it's narrower or more focused, you're going to get a more homogeneous kind of student. You're going to get more commonality in classrooms, in laboratories, and in studios. And when you open the doors wide, what you end up with is a greater diversity of not just people coming from different parts of the world, but they're also coming in with a lot of different learning skills and styles. And you don't have any, you have a much more heterogeneous or diverse community that you need to respond to. And my question centers around that, around how does the university this 21st century university understand what a new student, what the 21st century student really is. They're certainly a lot different than when I was a student, and certainly even if I go back 2 or 3 or 4 generations from now, which maybe is my halfway point, the students were still quite different. And I'm not so sure that I've heard anybody address the question of how does the university expect to get the kind of students it wants when its real dilemma is not business versus engineering versus humanities. It's about how to bring in that greater diverse student population and respond to them.
Who would like to start?
I think part of it is this idea we talked about in terms of international exposure and making sure that you're seen to be much more than just serving and have the ability to serve just your local community. I think it also points to the fact that we need to facilitate and encourage more interactions between the other universities and the colleges. So you're not seen to be just one institution based in one part of the city servicing and meeting the needs of the people in that part of the community. I mean, your community, it's how you define your community. It needs to be much broader. And I think you need to look at ways in which you interact with other institutions that are catering to the same type of students. It's a competitive business, but at the same time, you need to ensure that at the end of the day, what's most important is the value you're providing to the student. And if that value means having the student being able to take courses and interact with students in colleges or other universities, and that kind of interaction is what needs to be encouraged. If you can move to that point and encourage your funders to support activities that allow for that to take place, then I think you can get to that heterogeneous mix.
Dad?
Yeah, so I'm always amazed at the diversity in students. So whether it's their frame of reference, whether it's their previous experience, whether it's their interest in specific areas, or some are clearly more gifted than others in some areas. The students will move the agenda along. When we look at physicians, part of me says, well, let's just, hire the guys that know their science. But that's not what happens. And the people who come in to medicine might come from arts or philosophy or the sciences. And some of them come in with advanced degrees, and some of them come in with their basic 4-year degree, and some are rural, and some are urban, and some are international. And they all find their way. So to me, one of the opportunities of a university is it is wide open. And that's the beauty of it. So anybody can come. If you kind of got a grade point average, it's somewhere above failing, and you can afford it. And that makes a great mix in and of itself. And I'm not so worried about that diversity or wondering who the future students will be. I think that to some extent the economy and the environment and students themselves will push universities in various directions, whether it's how you teach, whether there's more humanities or more science. And so far, the students that I've been involved with over the past decades have made very interesting contributions and have gone on to have very interesting lives.
Yeah, I think we have to be prepared to change and adapt for the students. So a couple of examples, talking about the flexible learning I mentioned in my opening remarks. I mean, I think we have to be prepared to give students those flexible learning opportunities, to be able to take courses in different kinds of ways. They're very, very mobile. They're online. We have to be able to respond and react to that. We also have to, the university has to reflect what our students are. And if the Indigenous achievement is an important part of our strategic plan, for example, and part of that part of that Indigenous achievement is to increase the number of Indigenous students in the university, but also to reflect the university back to those students. So in a variety of ways, in the faculty and support staff who are on staff here, that they reflect those students, and also just in terms of the kind of art we have and the public spaces we have around the university, that those are there. So I think we always need to be attentive to diversity and to ensuring that we have an environment that is welcoming to all students.
And I would say we need to pay particular attention to those who aren't predisposed to find themselves here. I was in a meeting just recently and someone was pointing out that if we divide income levels into quintiles, most of us, our parents expected us to do better economically than they did, and probably most of us have. And the person was observing that in the top 4 quintiles, that's still true, but in the bottom quintile, it's not. We don't see a lot of those people in university, and if we really want to be representative of full diversity, we need to be very active to try and get them here. And I think it behooves us as a society to design good public policy that will help get those people here. And in this part of the country in particular, we've already talked about Indigenous presence. We know that we talked about this before. This university's focused on this for a long time. It's come a long way. There's still a long way to go. Let me just ask a question out of interest. How many people in the room who have gone to university were the first person in your family to do so? I was. Right? So that's a reasonable number of people. Right? And we know that made a difference for us. And for those of us that are involved in the system, we want to see that difference keep being made for other families and other generations of students, right? So I want to thank the panelists and everyone who participated this evening. It's always good to have these conversations. I want to encourage you to check out our After the Conversation page as well as Today for a recap of the evening. This is the last of the current series of Visionary Conversations, and I want to thank all of those who have attended and participated in discussions, and the familiar faces. Some of you are here almost every week or every month. It's great. Thanks for coming. If you come every week, I know you're here alone sometimes, but I get confused. We're also, we've been excited about these conversations. We're also excited about the Distinguished Alumni Awards Celebration of Excellence coming up on May the 12th, which will be an extraordinary evening honoring the achievements of 5 remarkable alumni of this institution. And so you might look at the website to get some information about that, to learn more about the recipients. I think the tickets have all been sold, but if you want to get on a waiting list, you could do that. Thank you again for being here this evening, and thank you for making this series a success. Thank you.